I was late for a meeting with the principal, and when I hurriedly ran down the school corridor and ran in, I was shocked to see my wife on her knees, satisfying the principal, who was standing with his pants down. Let me start this story from the beginning. I'd always considered our family pretty normal. Typical American family in a quiet town, with my wife, Megan, our two kids, Lily, who's in fourth grade, and Lucas, a second grader. Megan and I met in college, fell in love fast, and settled down quicker than most people thought wise. But it worked for us. She stayed home with the kids until Lucas started school, and now she's back working part-time at a law firm. Life felt predictable, steady, even if a little ordinary. Or so I thought. My day started out like any other. I was swamped with work, lost in spreadsheets and numbers that made sense even if they bored me half to death. Then, around noon, my cell buzzed. It was the kids' school, Jefferson Elementary, just a few blocks from our house. Instinctively, my stomach clenched. When a school calls you in the middle of the day, it's never good news. I picked up, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Mr. Lawson? This is Miss Roberts, the school secretary. Principal Carver asked that both you and Mrs. Lawson come in this afternoon. There's a situation involving your son, Lucas. Is he okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, yes, nothing health-related," she reassured me quickly. "Principal Carver just wants to discuss something with both of you in person." "All right, I'll try to get there by 3, I replied, mentally rearranging my schedule. "Thanks for letting me know." I texted Megan, hoping she could make it on time. She replied almost instantly with a thumbs-up emoji and, "Already on my way." She's always been quick to respond when it comes to the kids, one of the many things I love about her. Back to work I went, though my mind drifted constantly to that phone call. Was Lucas acting up in class? Getting bullied? As the clock inched closer to 3, I felt my tension rising. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something I wasn't seeing, something just on the edge of clarity, but I brushed it off and focused on getting through the workday. By the time I arrived at the school, it was already well past 3. Megan had texted that she'd gone ahead to speak with Principal Carver. Walking through those familiar halls, I couldn't help but feel the years melting away, back to when I was a kid at my own elementary school. The same linoleum floors, the faint smell of cafeteria food, and the sound of echoing voices. It felt like nothing had changed, even though decades had slipped by. Finally, I reached the principal's office. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard voices inside, muffled but intense. I froze for a moment, feeling like an intruder on something private. But it was my family, my kid they were talking about. So, I pushed the door open. What I saw next took me completely off guard. Megan was standing close to Principal Carver, almost too close. She looked nervous, a little flushed, and he was staring at her like they were in some soap opera scene. I blinked, certain my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the tension in the room was unmistakable. There was something there, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but enough to make me stop cold. "Oh, Adam." Megan's voice broke the silence, and she took a quick step back, her face shifting into a smile that looked forced. "You made it." "Yeah, sorry for being late," I replied, trying to match her tone and keep things light. "What's going on?" Principal Carver cleared his throat and turned to me with a professional smile. "Mr. Lawson, thank you for coming. We wanted to discuss a small issue with Lucas. He's been distracted in class. We think there may be something at home that's weighing on him." "Something at home?" I echoed, glancing at Megan. "Yes," she jumped in, her voice quick and tight. "Mr. Carver suggested that maybe he's been feeling left out." "Left out?" I tried to sound understanding, but I could feel a pulse of annoyance rising. Why hadn't I heard about this sooner if it was bothering Lucas? Principal Carver stepped in again, his tone far too soft for my liking. "Sometimes kids feel isolated if their parents are both busy. It's perfectly normal." His eyes drifted back to Megan as he spoke, like he was addressing her more than me. I watched as she nodded, biting her lip, her gaze darting between him and the floor. Something was seriously off, but I couldn't quite nail it down. I cleared my throat, trying to ground myself. "Well, thanks for the insight. We'll make sure Lucas gets the attention he needs." Megan glanced at me, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe? But before I could say anything, she turned back to Principal Carver, her voice as sweet as honey. Thank you for being so understanding, Mark. We'll make sure Lucas feels supported. Mark? She had never called anyone at the school by their first name, let alone a superior like the principal. I kept quiet, but the whole situation made me feel uneasy, like I was stepping into some strange alternate reality where the people I thought I knew had shadows I'd never seen before. As we left the office, I noticed Megan's hands were shaking. I wanted to ask her if everything was all right, but the words seemed to lodge in my throat. Instead, I offered a casual, "Guess Lucas will be all right once we're a little more mindful, right?" She nodded, giving me a forced smile. Of course, everything will be fine. On the drive home, I replayed the entire conversation, searching for the moment that had felt off. I couldn't quite pinpoint it, but that look between them, it nagged at me. It was more than friendly, more than professional. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe I was reading into things. But the thought gnawed at me for the rest of the evening. That night, after we'd put the kids to bed, I finally mustered up the courage to ask her, "So, everything all right with Lucas? Anything you want to tell me?" She looked startled, but quickly brushed it off. "No, not really. Just that we probably need to spend more time with him. That's all." Her voice was so even, so perfectly casual, that I almost believed her. Almost. But there was something there. A tightness in her smile, a guarded look in her eyes that told me otherwise. Lying in bed that night, my mind kept drifting back to that office, to the way she'd said his name, Mark, like it meant something more than it should. It was the kind of intimacy you don't just develop with the principal of your kid's school overnight. I convinced myself to sleep it off, to forget about it. But that uneasy feeling settled deep, refusing to be dismissed so easily. Little did I know, that was just the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of regular routines, but that uneasy feeling clung to me like a fog. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to paranoia. After all, we just talked about Lucas feeling left out. Maybe that was all this was, a simple misunderstanding, an overreaction. But then there were the small things. Little moments that added up to something bigger, even if I couldn't quite see the full picture. Take Tuesday, for instance. I came home early, hoping to surprise Megan with dinner. She usually worked from home that day, but when I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark and empty. I shot her a quick text asking where she was, and she replied that she'd stepped out to run some errands. Nothing unusual, except that her phone's location, which I could see through the family tracking app, showed she was near Jefferson Elementary. The kids didn't need to be picked up for another hour. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who tracks his wife's every move, but something about her proximity to the school at that time didn't sit right with me. When she finally came home, I tried to casually ask about her day. "Oh, nothing much," she said, busying herself with the grocery bags she'd brought in. "Just errands, a little shopping, that kind of thing." Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she'd rehearsed the answer. I studied her for a moment, waiting for her to offer more, but she didn't. She just kept unpacking, her face hidden from view as she put the groceries away. "Did you go by the school?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She froze for a split second, a hesitation so slight I almost missed it. "No," she said quickly, then added, "I mean, I just drove by on the way back from the store." "Why?" I shrugged. "No reason, just saw you were close by. Thought maybe there was something you forgot." "Nope," she replied, her back still turned. She was moving fast, too fast, her hands fumbling with a carton of eggs as if they were suddenly heavy. We left it at that, but as I lay in bed that night, my thoughts refused to settle. The more I replayed our conversation, the more her reactions stood out. They were too guarded, too rehearsed. I tried to shake off the suspicion gnawing at me. I was overthinking. I had to be. But that wasn't the end of it. A week later, I was heading home after a grueling day at the office when my phone rang. It was Lucas' teacher, Mrs. Evans, and immediately, my heart sank. "Mr. Lawson," she began, her voice tinged with an edge of discomfort. "Lucas has been having some behavioral issues recently. Normally, we wouldn't call about this, but he's become more withdrawn, not participating as much in class." I thought it might be best if we talked it over. I assured her I'd be there first thing in the morning, and as I hung up, a wave of guilt hit me. Maybe Lucas really was feeling neglected. Between my long hours at work and Megan's recent strange behavior, maybe we'd both been too distracted to notice. Determined to fix things, I set my alarm for early the next day and planned to meet with Mrs. Evans. But that evening, Megan beat me to it. When I got home, she was already waiting for me, an anxious look on her face. "Mrs. Evans called me too," she said before I could even set my bag down. "About Lucas. I went by the school today to talk with her and Principal Carver." Her words came out in a rush, like she wanted to get them over with as quickly as possible. I studied her, searching for any sign of the strange vibe I'd picked up last time. But she kept her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. "What did they say?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. She let out a sigh, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Just that he's been withdrawn, like they told you. They suggested maybe spending more time with him, one-on-one. Maybe we should plan a family trip, get him out of his routine for a bit." "Yeah, that sounds good," I said, though my mind was racing. She'd gone by the school without telling me? Again? As she turned to head into the kitchen, I noticed her phone on the counter, screen lighting up with a message. The notification flashed, and though I couldn't see the sender's name, I caught a glimpse of the text preview. "Can we talk later?" She quickly picked up her phone, her face tense as she swiped the message away. I forced myself to act casual, but the sight left a bad taste in my mouth. Maybe it was just a friend, a colleague, but I couldn't shake the image of her and Principal Carver in that office, standing just a little too close. That night, as we lay in bed, I could tell she was tense. Her back was to me, her breathing steady but somehow distant. I reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Megan, is everything all right?" My voice sounded small in the quiet room, a tentative echo in the darkness. She turned slightly, just enough to give me a quick nod. "Yeah, just tired, I guess. Everything's fine." But everything was not fine, and I knew it. Over the next few days, I noticed that Megan had become unusually preoccupied with her appearance. She'd always been naturally beautiful, never one for heavy makeup or dressing up unless we had a special occasion. But now, even for routine errands, she'd spend an extra 15 minutes in front of the mirror, fussing with her hair, picking out different outfits. I didn't say anything. Maybe it was just a phase, I told myself. Then came Friday. I'd taken the afternoon off to get a head start on a little project for Lucas, a treehouse we talked about building in the backyard. Figured I'd surprise him, give us something to work on together, just the two of us. But as I pulled into our street, I noticed Megan's car wasn't in the driveway. When I went inside, I saw a note on the kitchen counter. "Running errands. Be back in a couple of hours." For some reason, it bothered me. Something felt too familiar about that phrase, running errands. I couldn't shake the feeling that her errands had nothing to do with groceries or picking up dry cleaning. Impulsively, I pulled out my phone and opened the family tracking app. Sure enough, she was at Jefferson Elementary. But this time, it was nearly 4 p.m., long after the kids had been dismissed for the day. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but the pieces were starting to add up in a way I couldn't ignore. It was irrational, I knew that, but some part of me couldn't help but wonder, what if she wasn't alone? Before I knew it, I was back in the car, driving toward the school, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Megan would probably be at the front office, maybe talking to a teacher, getting advice about Lucas. But as I pulled into the nearly empty school parking lot, I saw her car, parked near the side entrance. Heart pounding, I sat in the car for a few minutes, debating whether to go in. If she was inside, I could at least see what she was doing, get some peace of mind. But I felt like I was crossing a line. I trusted my wife, didn't I? We'd been together for years. We had a family. I couldn't just assume the worst over some gut feeling. And yet, I couldn't leave. Gathering my nerve, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the side door, feeling every step as if I were sinking into quicksand. I tried the handle, surprised to find it unlocked, and slipped inside. The hallways were quiet, bathed in the warm afternoon light, and every shadow seemed to grow, twisting around me as I moved. Following the distant hum of voices, I made my way down the hallway, closer to the principal's office. My heart hammered against my ribcage, and I stopped just shy of the door, peering inside. What I saw froze me in place. Megan stood there with Principal Carver, both of them speaking in hushed tones. Her hand was on his arm, and they were standing so close, closer than I'd ever seen her with anyone else. The look on her face, it wasn't concern or worry. It was something else, something intimate. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the way she looked at him, the way he leaned toward her. Everything in me wanted to barge in, to confront them both. But a surge of anger and humiliation held me back. I turned and slipped out, the walls seeming to close in on me as I made my way back to the car. I sat there for a few minutes, my mind racing. My worst fears had just become reality. Megan, my Megan, was in there, practically draped over another man. The drive home was a blur, my hands gripping the wheel so hard they went numb. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had one clear thought in my mind. I needed to know the truth. I couldn't live with the shadows, the suspicions. I needed confirmation, one way or another. That was the moment everything changed. That night, Megan acted like everything was perfectly normal. She laughed with the kids at dinner, told me about her day in vague, breezy terms, and kissed me goodnight with her usual warmth. But I couldn't look at her without feeling the cold weight of suspicion pressing down on me. It was all I could do to play along, to act as though my world hadn't shifted irreversibly just a few hours ago. When she fell asleep, I lay there in the dark, my mind racing through every interaction, every moment that had once seemed harmless. How many times had she left early for an errand? How many times had she dressed up without reason? And what about Lucas? Had his withdrawn behavior started because he sensed something wrong at home? The thoughts circled endlessly, each one stabbing a little deeper. Unable to sleep, I slid out of bed quietly and made my way downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table, my face buried in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. But there was no sense to be made. I wanted answers, real, concrete answers. Not the vague assurances and excuses she'd been feeding me for weeks. I reached for her phone, which she'd left charging on the counter. I knew it was wrong, but at that moment, my need to know the truth outweighed any sense of guilt. After all, if I was wrong, if this was all in my head, I'd owe her an apology. But if I was right, with shaking hands, I unlocked her phone. I navigated to her messages, my heart hammering as I scrolled past the usual texts from friends and family. And then, there it was, a thread with a contact saved simply as M. The messages hit me like a punch to the gut. Hey, can we meet after school tomorrow? Of course. Same place? Yes. Miss you. I forced myself to scroll down, each line a hammer blow to whatever hope I had left. I can't stop thinking about you, Megan. Me neither. But we have to be careful. I know. I'll see you tomorrow. My fingers went numb, my hands slipping from the phone as I tried to process what I'd just seen. There it was, in her own words, proof that she'd been meeting him behind my back. 1,000 questions buzzed in my head, each one sharper and more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Did the kids know? Did anyone else? I couldn't go back to bed. I couldn't even think straight. All I knew was that my marriage, the life I'd built with Megan, was hanging by a thread. And now, that thread was slipping right through my fingers. The next morning, I watched her as she got ready, the same routine that I'd seen 1,000 times before. But now, every movement seemed calculated, suspicious. She looked at herself in the mirror for a few extra seconds, smoothing her hair, checking her lipstick. It was all so deliberate. I wanted to say something, to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. I had to keep my anger in check, to gather more information. If I rushed in, I risked getting half answers, lies wrapped in just enough truth to keep me guessing. No, I needed to be sure. I needed more. So, I waited. I went to work, struggling through meetings and emails, barely able to focus on anything except the gnawing ache in my gut. I felt like a shell of myself, going through the motions while my real self was somewhere else, consumed by the betrayal. By the time the workday ended, I had a plan. I told my boss I was taking a few days off for family matters and left the office with one goal in mind. I would follow her. I needed to see it for myself, to witness the truth with my own eyes. The following afternoon, I left work early and parked a few blocks from Jefferson Elementary, well out of sight. I watched the main entrance, my eyes fixed on the parking lot as I waited for her car to appear. Minutes crawled by, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my ears. Just when I started to wonder if I'd missed her, I saw her pull into the lot and park near the side entrance. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I watched her get out, glancing around as if to check if anyone was watching. She walked toward the side door with quick, purposeful strides, disappearing inside. A few moments later, another figure appeared, Principal Carver. He glanced around just as she had, then slipped in after her. I sat there, stunned. My worst fears laid bare before me. I had half a mind to burst in, to confront them both. But something held me back. This wasn't the time or the place. If I went in there now, I'd be acting on rage, and I wouldn't get the answers I needed. Instead, I sat there, my fists clenched and jaw tight, trying to hold myself together. I waited, counting the minutes, each one stretching on for what felt like an eternity. After about 30 minutes, they emerged, both of them with flushed faces and disheveled hair. They didn't even glance around this time, too absorbed in each other to notice anything else. My heart shattered as I watched Megan smile at him, a soft, intimate smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. She laughed at something he said, the sound light and carefree, like they had no idea of the damage they were inflicting. They walked together to her car, lingering for a moment too long before she finally got in and drove off. I followed her home, keeping a safe distance, my mind reeling with a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. Part of me was still in shock, refusing to accept what I'd just seen. But the reality was inescapable. Megan was cheating on me, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. When I got home, she was already there, acting as if everything was normal. She greeted me with a smile, asked about my day, and made small talk like she hadn't just been with another man. I forced myself to play along, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to demand an explanation. But I needed to think, to figure out my next move. She had ripped my heart out, and I wasn't about to let her walk away without facing the consequences. That night, I stayed up again, this time with a plan forming in my mind. I wasn't going to let this betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let her ruin everything we'd built together. If she wanted to tear our family apart, she'd have to face the consequences of her choices. I reached out to an old friend of mine, Jake, who worked as a private investigator. We hadn't spoken in years, but he picked up on the first ring. "Jake, it's Adam," I said, my voice strained. "I need your help. It's about Megan." There was a pause on the other end, then his voice softened. "What's going on, man?" I filled him in, sparing none of the painful details. Jake listened without interrupting, his tone calm and steady as he absorbed everything. "I'll take care of it," he said finally. "Give me a few days. I'll get you the information you need." As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. I was done sitting in the dark, done with the lies and half-truths. With Jake's help, I would have the full story. And once I had it, I'd confront her with the evidence, make her face the reality she tried so hard to hide. The next few days felt like a blur. I went through the motions of work, barely registering anything except for Jake's periodic updates. Each message he sent confirmed what I'd feared. Megan and Principal Carver had been meeting regularly, sometimes during the day, sometimes after school. They had a pattern, a rhythm to their secret meetings that made me sick. Finally, on Friday night, Jake texted me, "Meet me tomorrow morning. I have everything you need." The message sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The time for waiting was over. I would finally have the full truth, and once I did, there would be no going back. The next morning, I met Jake at a small diner on the edge of town. He sat in a corner booth, a manila envelope on the table in front of him. I felt a lump in my throat as I approached, a strange mix of dread and anticipation swirling inside me. "Adam," he greeted me, his voice low and serious. He gestured for me to sit, sliding the envelope toward me. "I got everything you asked for. You sure you're ready for this?" I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. I took a deep breath and opened the envelope, my hands shaking as I pulled out a stack of photos, call logs, and printed messages. Each page, each image, was a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. Megan and Principal Carver in his office, standing too close, lingering touches, secret glances. One photo even showed them at a secluded coffee shop, her hand resting on his. Jake watched me carefully, his expression guarded. I didn't want to believe it either, Adam. I've known you both for years. But well, there it is. I couldn't look up, couldn't meet his eyes. How long? He hesitated, then sighed. A few months at least, maybe longer. They were careful at first, but they got sloppy. Texts, phone calls, meeting in public places. It's like they stopped caring if they got caught. My stomach churned. The betrayal felt even worse knowing they'd been doing this for so long, hiding it behind everyday routines and lies. Megan's laugh, her smiles, all the small moments that once felt real now seemed like fragments of a carefully constructed illusion. Jake reached across the table, his hand resting on my shoulder. Listen, Adam, I know it hurts, but whatever you decide to do, just remember, you've got people who care about you. You don't have to go through this alone. I nodded, managing a weak, thanks, Jake. When I left the diner, the envelope tucked under my arm, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was as if, for the first time in weeks, I finally had control. I had the truth, the whole truth, and now it was time to confront Megan. That evening, I waited until the kids were asleep. Megan was in the living room, curled up on the couch, flipping through a magazine like it was any other Saturday night. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment, wondering how someone I'd once loved so deeply could betray me so thoroughly. Finally, I cleared my throat, and she looked up, startled by the intensity in my gaze. Adam, is everything all right? She set the magazine down, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to read my expression. No, Megan, everything is not all right. I walked over and placed the manila envelope on the coffee table in front of her. I think it's time you explain what's going on with you and Principal Carver. Her face went pale, her eyes widening as she stared at the envelope. She glanced up at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. Adam, I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Cut the crap, Megan. My voice was steady, cold. I know everything. I've seen the texts, the photos. You've been meeting him behind my back for months. Don't even try to lie to me. For a moment, she just sat there, frozen. Then, as if something inside her snapped, she buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking as she let out a muffled sob. Adam, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The apology felt empty, hollow. I stared at her, waiting. But no words came to mind that could even begin to express the anger, the hurt, the betrayal I felt. How long, Megan? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been sneaking around with him? She took a shaky breath, wiping at her tears, and looked up at me with a guilt-ridden expression. A few months, since the start of the school year. It just happened. I didn't plan it. I swear, Adam, I never wanted to hurt you. I clenched my fists, trying to control the rage bubbling up inside me. You didn't want to hurt me? Megan, you've torn our family apart. Do you even understand what you've done? She nodded, her face crumpling as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I know, Adam. I was weak, and I let myself get swept up in something I thought I wanted. But I love you. I love our family. I know I messed up, but please don't throw it all away because of my mistake. Your mistake? I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and foreign. This isn't a mistake, Megan. This is a choice you made over and over again. You lied to me, you lied to the kids, and you betrayed everything we built together. And now you're asking me not to throw it all away? That's exactly what you did the second you walked into his office. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, standing up and pacing across the room. My mind was a storm of emotions, each one pulling me in a different direction. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something, anything to release the tension building inside me. Why? I demanded, turning back to her. Why him? Why did you throw everything away for him? She hesitated, her eyes dropping to her lap. I don't know. He made me feel noticed, understood. After so many years of just routine, I guess I got lost. He gave me attention, and I was weak enough to fall for it. I shook my head, disgusted. So, what? I didn't notice you enough? I didn't give you the life you wanted? No, Adam. It's not like that. It was never about you. This was my mistake, my selfishness. She looked up at me, pleading. Please, just give me a chance to make it right. Let me show you that I can fix this. Fix this? How do you fix something that's been shattered to pieces? But looking at her, sitting there with her face streaked with tears, I felt a strange sense of pity mingling with the rage. This was the woman I'd once trusted, the mother of my children. The memories we'd built together, the love we'd once shared. They were all tangled up in this mess, and I didn't know if I could cut through it. Megan, I can't just forget this. You betrayed me in ways I can't even begin to understand. My voice wavered, the anger starting to give way to a deep, aching sadness. And now you want me to just pretend it didn't happen? I don't want you to pretend, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. I want a chance to prove to you that I can be the wife, the mother, you deserve. I know I've lost your trust, but if there's any part of you that still loves me, please, let me try. I sank down onto the couch, burying my face in my hands, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Did I still love her? I didn't even know. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd shared my life with, she felt like a stranger now, someone I barely recognized. For a long time, we sat there in silence, the distance between us wider than it had ever been. Finally, I looked up, meeting her tear-filled eyes with a cold, measured gaze. We'll tell the kids in the morning, I said quietly, and then we'll figure out what to do from there. A look of horror crossed her face, and she shook her head, panic flashing in her eyes. Adam, please, no, don't bring the kids into this. They don't need to know. They deserve the truth, Megan, I replied, my voice firm. They deserve to know why their lives are about to change. She started to protest, but the look on my face must have told her there was no point. She sank back against the couch, defeated, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I got up, feeling the heavy weight of finality settling over me. I walked upstairs, each step feeling like a mile, and made my way to the spare room. I couldn't sleep beside her, not tonight, maybe not ever again. Lying there in the darkness, I felt the full weight of the betrayal hit me, the reality sinking in with brutal clarity. My life as I knew it was over. Everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I could trust, was gone. And as the first light of dawn crept through the window, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The next morning felt different, heavier somehow. I woke up alone in the spare room, my mind still thick with the events of the previous night. The confrontation with Megan had left me drained, but I knew the hardest part was yet to come. Today, we'd have to sit down with the kids. There was no easy way to tell them that their family was unraveling. When I went downstairs, Megan was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee clutched in her hands. She looked exhausted, her face pale and eyes red-rimmed. For a moment, a pang of sympathy crossed my mind, but it quickly faded as I remembered the betrayal, the lies, the images in that manila envelope that I'd never be able to erase. She looked up as I walked in, her gaze pleading, but I ignored it, walking past her to pour myself a coffee. Neither of us spoke, the silence thick and suffocating. Finally, I broke it. We're telling them after breakfast, I said, my voice sounding foreign even to myself. She nodded, her shoulders sagging as if a weight had settled onto them. We didn't need to go into details, didn't need to argue over what we'd say. We both knew the message we had to deliver, and we both knew it would change everything. After breakfast, we gathered Lily and Lucas in the living room. They looked up at us with curious eyes, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words, but all that came out was the truth, stripped down and raw. Kids, I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. Mom and I need to talk to you about something important. Megan reached over, taking my hand, and though I wanted to pull away, I knew this was something we had to do together. We're going to be living separately for a while, Megan added, her voice trembling. There are things between us that we need to work on. It doesn't change how much we love you both. Lily's face crumpled, confusion and fear flashing in her eyes. Are you getting divorced? I looked at Megan, feeling the weight of my own hesitation. I hadn't decided yet. Part of me wanted to walk away, to cut all ties, but another part knew that it wasn't that simple. Divorce meant reshaping our lives in ways that would ripple out, affecting not just me, but our kids and the family we'd built together. We don't know yet, honey, I said, forcing a small smile. We're going to try to figure things out, but for now, Mom and I just need some space. Lucas, ever the practical one, nodded slowly, like he was trying to process what we'd said. So, Dad won't be home as much? I swallowed hard, the sadness in his voice cutting straight through me. Maybe not right now, buddy, but you'll still see me, all the time. Nothing will keep me away from you two. Ever. The kids didn't fully understand, and I didn't expect them to. They knew things were changing, but the real gravity of it would take time to sink in. As I watched them leave the room, the tightness in my chest grew, and I wondered if I'd done the right thing. If there even was a right thing in all of this. Over the next few weeks, Megan and I found a rhythm of sorts. We split our time with the kids, alternating between staying at the house and at a small apartment I'd rented across town. It was surreal, stepping in and out of my own life, playing the role of father and husband one day, then spending the next alone, trying to sort through the wreckage of my marriage. Megan tried to reach out, to talk, to apologize. She suggested counseling, saying she wanted to fix things, to prove that she was committed to rebuilding our family. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was her betrayal, the images of her and Principal Carver etched into my mind. Her apologies felt empty, too little too late. The foundation of our marriage was broken, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat in my apartment, staring at the walls, the silence pressing down on me. I'd been avoiding making a decision, hoping time would bring some kind of clarity, but it hadn't. I felt stuck, suspended between my past with Megan and the future I hadn't yet dared to imagine. I called Jake, the friend who'd helped me uncover the affair. He picked up on the first ring. "Hey man," he said, his voice warm. "How you holding up?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm in limbo, I guess. I just don't know what to do." Jake was quiet for a moment, then spoke gently. "Adam, I can't tell you what's right for you. But whatever decision you make it for yourself. Don't do it out of anger or revenge. Do it because it's what's best for you and for your kids." His words hit me hard, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of clarity. Maybe he was right. Maybe this decision couldn't be about Megan, or even about the betrayal. It had to be about what I wanted, about the life I wanted to build moving forward, for myself and for my kids. The next morning, I met with Megan at a small cafe. She looked nervous, her fingers twisting around the edge of her coffee cup as she waited for me to speak. I took a deep breath, feeling the finality of the moment. "Megan, I've thought about this for a long time," I began, my voice steady. "And I can't stay in this marriage. Too much has happened. I can't look at you the same way anymore. I can't pretend that this didn't happen." Her face crumpled, and tears filled her eyes, but she nodded, accepting the reality of what I was saying. "I understand," she whispered. I never wanted it to end like this, Adam. I'm so sorry." I looked away, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "I know, but it's too late for apologies. All I care about now is making sure the kids are okay. We'll tell them together, make it as easy on them as we can." She nodded, her shoulders slumping as the reality sank in. We sat in silence for a while, two strangers who had once shared a life, now bound only by the memories and the children we'd brought into the world. The following weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, lawyers, and long conversations about co-parenting. Megan and I kept our interactions civil, focusing on the kids and doing our best to keep things normal for them. It wasn't easy, but as the days went by, the rawness of the betrayal started to dull, replaced by a quiet acceptance. This was my new life, and I had to make the best of it. One evening, I took the kids out for ice cream, just the three of us. We laughed, made silly faces, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of joy, a reminder that life could be good again. It wouldn't be the same, but maybe it didn't have to be. As we drove home, Lucas looked up at me from the back seat, his face serious. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, concerned. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, and for the first time, I found myself able to smile, a real, genuine smile. "Yeah, buddy, I think I am." And in that moment, I knew that somehow I'd come out of this. I didn't know what the future held, but I had my kids, I had my freedom, and for the first time, I had the chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. As we pulled into the driveway, I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. It was a new beginning, a bittersweet one, maybe, but one I was ready to face. And whatever came next, I knew I'd be okay. 1. Subscribe to the channel and like this story if you liked it. Turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. Click on the playlist on the right to listen to previous stories. See you soon.